Well, we're joined now by NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi Majola. Phakamile, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. I suppose some good news for you and your members?
Indeed, Kathy, we can definitely say that for us it is a relief that we have reached this point now where we have signed an agreement and where the majority of workers have accepted the proposal that Eskom had put on the table. We think that it's been a very difficult battle. I don't think I have to tell you about that. But now it's over. It's over, and workers are expected to be back at work, and that's that.
The fact that the strike is over also presents an opportunity to reflect on some of what we saw during the strike. And there have been a couple of things that have been raised, particularly by Eskom and by some of the other unions. Let's talk about this intimidation and the disruption that was said to have taken place during the duration of the strike. What do you as a union know about it?
We only know what the minister presented to the media. We don't know any more than that. And for us, really, we are really not going to engage much on that because as a trade union, of course, we do not support criminal activity. But we're not going to answer for things that have not been proven. And that's where we stand on the matter. And a lot of what we saw, especially with the protests, I mean, the fact is that workers went on protest action after Eskom did a terrible thing, which was to simply walk out of wage talks the way that they did at a time when we were actually trying to find each other, and thus provoke workers into protest action. And we've always felt that the anger of workers was understandable, given the situation that Eskom had put them in. If Eskom had done the responsible thing and had done the mature thing and had sat through wage talks and engaged with us meaningfully, we would not have had to be here negotiating against the backdrop of workers on strike and all this instability that we're currently dealing with. So the fact is that as far as we're concerned, up until evidence is actually presented that indeed it was our members who were responsible for that, we're not going to comment.
So does the evidence that the minister present, because you say that's what you know about, so does that evidence not, you believe, it does not necessarily point to your members? It's evidence of what took place, but who was behind it is the big question.
Exactly. And that's actually what needs to happen. Investigations must be conducted, and we can then respond more properly once we're actually presented with facts in terms of whether NUMSA members were involved. Then we can be able to give you
Are you going to be doing anything to try to get to the bottom of it? And part of the reason I ask this question is that for years now, there have been ongoing statements coming out of Eskom about how its operations are being deliberately sabotaged by workers. And if that is taking place to the extent that Eskom would have us believe, there must be some workers who know something about these individuals that are behind it.
You're right. And yet to this day, Kathy, with all the numerous statements that they've presented, you recall there was even a visit an official visit that the president cancelled on the allegation that there was sabotage. There's been no evidence. So to us, this is just another example of more allegations without actual evidence. And this is why we're saying we are not going to be put in a corner to condemn or not to condemn or to... These things must be proven. They must be proven. We've heard these allegations before, and they are never proven. They are simply allegations, and in many, many cases, they are used as a weapon to attack workers, to blame workers for things that they perhaps have nothing to do with.
There's a concern about the precedent that has been set with this protest, Eskom being considered essential workers, and the fact that the unprotected strike took place, workers stayed away, and it worsened the load-shedding situation in the country. Your view on that, looking back, do you think that this was the right course, the right path to follow?
The Constitution says every worker has the right to strike. And that actually even applies to workers at Eskom. The unfortunate circumstance that workers at Eskom face is that the Labour Law or the Essential Services Committee has deemed them as essential, which means that they may not embark on a lawfully protected strike. As a trade union, we will always defend the right of workers to strike. And in our view, this protest would never have happened if Eskom had acted in the right way. They provoked this action. We were right in the middle of talks. And the thing that made them disrupt the process was when we were challenging them on their proposal to say, you can't stand here and lie and tell us you can't afford to pay a 12% across the board increase. We've been able to demonstrate to you, using your financials, that not only is this affordable, but it's far less than what you're coughing out on primary energy costs, bloated, dodgy contracts with IPP, coal and diesel, which you refuse to intervene on, and yet you want to continue to take away benefits and conditions of workers whilst funding these corrupt contracts. And it was when we made that accusation to them that they picked up their bags and said they were declaring a dispute and walked out of talks. That was them provoking the protests that we saw. And I think it's very unfair that workers at Eskom have been blamed for something that the Eskom management could have prevented by simply doing the right thing, by simply allowing themselves to be accountable for their actions. It was very immature, very reckless, and the whole country paid for their recklessness.
One of the things that became very concerning is that sometime during the strike, it must have been about 2 weeks ago, and it would have been when we began to enter stage 6 load shedding, that there was a sentiment expressed that effectively workers were doing their own thing. Nobody had control over protests, over where they would be breaking out, over how they would be breaking out. You, as a union representative, and some of the other representatives from NUMSA said, well, we're not in control of the workers. This is pretty much an unled strike that is taking place. Talk to me about that and whether you have concerns about it at all.
We've said constantly on many media platforms, NUMSA is a worker-controlled union. And I think it's time that the South African public understood what that means. It means we do what workers tell us to do. We are not their bosses. We don't have the power to demand from them or make demands on them. They make demands on us. They lead strike actions. They lead protests. Our job is to assist them, support them in whatever way that we can, in whatever it is that they want to do. On the matter of workers protesting at Eskom, it indeed was not sanctioned by unions. We didn't know anything about it. We found out about it on Friday when Eskom made the announcement that there were workers protesting at various power stations. It was an action that workers took on themselves, spontaneously responding to how Eskom management had behaved. And at the end of the day, it was actually the unions that were very responsible from day one, from the moment that Eskom walked out of wage talks. We urgently wrote a letter to the Director and the executive management, and we said, listen, what you guys have done has provoked the anger of workers. Please come back to the negotiating table. They arrogantly responded that their walking out was mandated and that their position was fixed and they were unwilling to negotiate. They refused to come back to the negotiating table, thus deepening the crisis. They waited until the anger reached boiling point, as we now know, and only contacted us maybe 4 or 5 days later for a meeting. So again, this is a reflection of the attitude that Eskom management has. This process needed to be managed properly. And unfortunately, because at Eskom right now, the leadership is weak, we're not experiencing good management, we should not be surprised that this team would have behaved in the very immature and reckless way that they did, which led to the situation that we were in, where unions now had to come in, you know, basically put out the fire, literally, try and talk to workers, try and pacify them. That's the work that we've been doing. That we now, at this point, we've now got an agreement based on what workers are demanding. And again, we are calling for normality amongst workers and our members. And we sincerely hope that will be the case, and we're sure that will be the case now, because their burning issues have been resolved. But we even reflected on this in the press conference today when we were announcing to the public that we have a very serious problem with this Eskom management that really does not respect workers, does not respect bargaining and negotiation. They were actually relying on the fact that workers are essential, abusing that in the hope that they could just impose whatever outcome as they did last year. Unfortunately, it didn't work this year because workers decided to take matters into their own hands, as we saw them doing, and that was the result.
Eskom says it will be a struggle to meet the 7% wage increase. What does that mean to you?
We don't believe that for 1 second, because when we were demanding 12% as NUMSA, we were able to show that the 12% wage increase across the board would only cost them 1.2 billion. And it's against the backdrop of 4 years. For 4 years, workers in the bargaining unit, the ones that we negotiate for, the Central Bargaining Forum, they have not had a meaningful increase in 4 years. The wage bill has remained flat at not more than 17.4 billion rand. But in the same 4 years where workers have not received an increase, we've seen an astronomical increase in the cost of primary energy, where these costs, the cost of coal, the cost of IPP, the cost of diesel, have shot up from 85 billion to 116 billion rand. So how do you then turn around and say you can't afford workers' wages? That's outrageous.
Phakamile, I'm going to end it off with this last question. The Minister, Pravin Gordhan, was quoted as having said before the ANC's NEC the last couple of days that they are going to be calling in former CEOs of Eskom that have raised their hands up to help support and bring in some of the former power plant and station managers that can help build capacity in this institution. Is that a good idea? Do you think it will help alleviate where we are right now?
It depends if he's being truthful. When he says he's bringing back power station managers to do what? When they're shutting down power stations, what will these power station managers be doing? So I think we need to be interrogating what he is saying, because the very same minister is shutting down power stations. In fact, part of the reason why load shedding is so bad, they've shut down units in various power stations which has removed more than 2,000 megawatts of power. And they've done that for the benefit of IPPs, the very same IPPs that are not assisting us in this load shedding crisis. So we would need to understand what the context of what that is in more detail. But the problem is that what we know is they intend to close these down. So we're not sure what these power station managers would be doing when power stations are busy shutting down.
All right. Phakamile Hlubi Majola, she's with NUMSA. We'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks for coming into studio.